Have you ever tried to help someone you love, only to realize they no longer see any value in what you have to offer, not because they say it directly, but because of the way they respond, the way they look at you, the way they dismiss you without even realizing it? Because that's exactly what happened to me, and the silence I chose that day wasn't just silence, it was the moment I understood my place in this family had changed. That day, everyone was in the house, but somehow it didn't feel like home. My son, his wife, and a few relatives were sitting together, discussing something important. Their voices were low, serious, like a big decision was being made. I walked in quietly and sat down, just like I had done for years, without needing an invitation, because this was my home, these were my people, and their problems had always been mine too. But this time, something felt different. No one looked at me, not even once. It wasn't like before. There was a time when no decision was made without asking me, when my words carried weight, when my presence meant something. But now I was just sitting there, listening, understanding, but not included. We need to decide this quickly, my son said, his voice firm, slightly rushed, like he wanted to get it over with. Yes, and we don't need anyone else's help, my daughter in law added immediately. That line, it didn't sound wrong on the surface, but I felt it, because sometimes words carry meanings that are not spoken out loud. I gently asked, "What happened, Beta? If there's any problem, maybe I can help." My voice was soft, sincere. I truly meant it. I had always meant it. But the moment I said that, the room changed. Everyone looked at me. But not the way they used to. There was no warmth, no comfort, just a strange hesitation. My son gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, you don't need to worry," he said. "We'll handle it. We'll handle it." Simple words, but that day they meant something else. They meant you're not needed anymore. Still, I tried once more. "Beta, I've handled things for years. Maybe my experience could." "Mom, please," my daughter in law interrupted. Her tone was polite, but there was no respect in it. "You should rest now. We'll take care of everything." Rest, such a gentle word, but when it's used to move you aside, it hurts in ways people don't understand. I went quiet. The conversation continued, but this time I wasn't just listening, I was feeling every word. Every decision was being made without me, as if I didn't exist. And the most painful part wasn't that they rejected my help, it was that they didn't even consider it necessary. I slowly lowered my eyes, my hands folded into each other, trying to hold myself together, because the truth was I had never lived for myself. I had given my entire life to this family. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every decision was for them. And today, when I simply offered help, I was made to feel like I wasn't capable anymore. I stood up, slowly. No one stopped me. No one said, "Mom, sit down." No one even noticed I was leaving. And in that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding. I still lived in this house, but I was no longer important in it. I walked back to my room. Sat by the window, the same window I had sat by for years, looking at the same sky, but that day, everything felt different. I asked myself a simple question: am I really no longer needed, or have they just stopped seeing me? Because there's a difference, a big one, and that day I felt something I had never felt before, not anger, not even sadness, just realization. Maybe I had made them so strong that they no longer felt they needed me. But at the same time, something else didn't sit right, because the way they stopped me, the way they cut me off, that wasn't just independence. It was something deeper, something I couldn't fully understand yet, but I could feel it. And that feeling stayed with me, quietly, heavily, and in that moment I made a decision. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to help, and most importantly, I stopped offering. Because when people stop valuing you, trying to prove your worth only makes you smaller. And I had never been small, not in my life, not in my choices, not in what I had built, so I chose silence. But this silence was not weakness, it was patience, because somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice told me something very clearly. This wasn't the end, because today they rejected my help, but very soon they were going to need it. And when that day came, everything would change. Have you ever wondered why a mother or a grandmother keeps giving long after she's tired, long after she's done enough, long after no one even asks her to? It's not because she has to, it's because somewhere deep inside, she never stops feeling responsible, never stops caring, never stops thinking, if something goes wrong, I should be there. And maybe that's why it hurts the most when the same people you gave everything to start believing they don't need you anymore. After that day, I didn't say anything. Not to them, not to anyone, but inside there was a quiet storm, because I hadn't just heard their words, I had understood what those words meant. They didn't just refuse my help, they had already decided I was no longer necessary. And that realization, it stays with you. It doesn't shout, it doesn't break you loudly, it just settles slowly, deeply. I kept thinking about one question: why did I want to help so badly? Because this wasn't the first time they were facing a decision. There had been many moments like this in the past, moments when everything felt uncertain, complicated, risky, and every single time I had been there, not in front but behind, quietly holding everything together. I remember the years they don't talk about anymore, the years when nothing was easy, when stability wasn't given, it was built. Piece by piece, choice by choice, sacrifice by sacrifice. There was a time when even small decisions felt heavy because the consequences mattered, because we couldn't afford mistakes. I remember nights when I stayed awake long after everyone slept, not because I wanted to, but because I had to figure things out: how to manage expenses, how to keep things running, how to make sure tomorrow wouldn't fall apart. And mornings when I woke up already tired but still kept going, because stopping was never an option, not when someone depended on you. My son did, completely. His future, his stability, his comfort, they were all built on choices I made. On things I carried quietly, without ever letting him feel the weight of it, because that's what love does: it hides the struggle, so the people you care about don't have to carry it. But sometimes, when you hide it too well, people forget it ever existed. And when they forget the struggle, they stop valuing the person who went through it. That's exactly what happened. They didn't see the years I spent building everything. They didn't feel the pressure I handled alone. They didn't understand the decisions I had to make. All they saw was the result: a stable home, a comfortable life, a sense of security. And over time, that result stopped feeling like something I built and started feeling like something that simply belonged to them. That shift is where everything changes, because once someone believes something belongs to them, they stop asking where it came from. They stop respecting what it took to build it, and they start assuming it will always be there. That's what I saw in them now: the way they spoke about decisions without hesitation, the way they talked about money as if it was something permanent, the way they believed they had complete control. But control isn't just about having something, it's about understanding it, and understanding comes from experience, not assumption. I remember a time when my son would come to me before making even a small decision. "Mom, what do you think?" he would ask, not because he couldn't decide, but because he valued my perspective, my experience, my understanding. And now he didn't ask anymore, not because he didn't need help, but because he believed he didn't. And that belief was his biggest mistake, because confidence without understanding creates problems, quiet ones at first. But they grow, and I could already see it, even if they couldn't. That day when he said, "We'll handle it," it wasn't just confidence, it was a decision to move forward without me. And maybe he thought that was the right thing to do. Maybe he believed he was ready. And maybe in some ways he was. But life doesn't test you where you're prepared, it tests you where you're not, and that's where experience matters. That's where understanding matters. That's where someone like me used to stand. I didn't want to control anything. I didn't want to take over. I didn't want to prove I was right. I just wanted to stand behind them like I always had, quietly, ready in case something went wrong, but they didn't see that difference. To them, my presence felt like interference, not support. And that's when I realized something important. They didn't reject my help because they didn't need it. They rejected it because they didn't understand it. And once that understanding is gone, you can't force it back. You have to let life teach it. And life always does, in its own time, in its own way. After that day, I stopped offering, stopped suggesting, stopped stepping in, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because if someone believes they don't need you, the only way they will understand your value is by experiencing your absence. And that's what I gave them: not distance, not coldness, just absence where I used to be present. And slowly, very slowly, things started to change, not dramatically, not immediately, but quietly, just like everything else. Because when something important is missing, you don't always notice it right away, but you feel it in small ways, in subtle shifts, in things that don't work as smoothly as they used to. And I could see it coming, step by step. Because I had seen it before, many times, just not from this side, and deep down, I knew something they didn't yet. They thought they had everything under control, but very soon they were going to realize that what they rejected was never just help. It was understanding, it was experience, it was stability. And those are things you don't realize the value of until they're gone. And when that realization finally comes, it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait, it simply arrives. And changes everything. Have you ever been in a situation where you could clearly see what was going wrong, every mistake, every gap, every outcome, but you still chose not to say anything, not because you didn't care, but because you knew that your words wouldn't change anything anymore? Because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's understanding. It's the moment you realize that some lessons can't be explained, they have to be lived. That's exactly what I chose silence. After that day, something inside me shifted. From the outside, everything looked the same same house, same routine, same people, but inside I was different. Before, I was always aware of everything. If something needed attention, I noticed it. If something was about to go wrong, I sensed it. If a decision needed guidance, I stepped in. Not loudly, not forcefully, just quietly correcting things before they became problems. But now I stopped, not because I couldn't, but because I decided not to. Because when someone believes they don't need you, the worst thing you can do is keep trying to prove that they do. So I stepped back, not away from them, but away from the role I had always played. And that's where everything began to change. At first, they didn't notice. Of course, they didn't, because they were focused on something else, something they believed was more important: control, independence. The idea that they could handle everything on their own. And I let them believe that completely, because belief is strongest right before it breaks. Days passed, and slowly small things started to shift. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. Just subtle changes, things that used to be simple took a little longer. Decisions that used to feel clear now carried hesitation, not enough to cause alarm, but enough to create a feeling, a quiet discomfort. I remember one evening clearly. They were sitting together, going through some documents, talking about numbers, plans, decisions, things that once would have included me without question, but this time they didn't even look in my direction. And I didn't say a word, I simply continued with what I was doing. Quiet, present, but not involved. Is this correct? My daughter in law asked, her voice slightly unsure. I think so, my son replied, but I heard it. That small hesitation, that lack of certainty, it wasn't there before, and that's the difference experience makes. It doesn't just give you answers, it gives you confidence in those answers. And now they didn't have that. Before, I would have spoken. A small correction, a simple suggestion, and everything would have fallen into place, but not this time. This time I stayed silent because this wasn't my role anymore. They had made that clear, and now they had to live with it. Slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to change. It wasn't obvious, but it was real. The calm that once filled the space was replaced by a thin layer of tension. Conversations became slightly longer, decisions took more effort. And most importantly, they started relying on each other more, because now there was no one else quietly holding things together. And that's when I noticed something else. My son had changed, not completely, but subtly. He paused more. Thought longer, double checked things he never used to question. And that pause, it wasn't just thinking, it was uncertainty. Something he hadn't felt before, because earlier he had something he didn't even realize: my experience, my understanding. My presence, and now he didn't, but he still hadn't admitted it, not even to himself, because people don't accept the truth immediately. First, they ignore it, then they question it, and finally, they understand it. And he was still in the first stage, ignoring, believing everything was still under control. But control isn't about holding things, it's about understanding them. And understanding comes from time, from mistakes, from experience. And now he was about to go through all of it on his own. I never stopped him, never corrected him, never said, I told you so, because that's easy, but it doesn't teach anything. I wanted him to understand. Not because I said it, but because he felt it, because what you feel stays with you. Days turned into weeks. And those small mistakes started to grow, not huge, not obvious, but enough to create impact. A wrong calculation here, a missed detail there, a decision that didn't turn out the way it should have, and each time I saw it, understood it. But said nothing because this wasn't my responsibility anymore. They had chosen this, and now they had to experience it. One day, my son looked at me for a few seconds, longer than usual, as if he wanted to say something, ask something. But he didn't, and I understood why, because deep down, he had started to feel it. That something was missing, but he hadn't named it yet. He hadn't accepted it yet, and that's the hardest part, accepting the truth. Especially when it means realizing you were wrong. But that moment was getting closer, because the truth, no matter how long you avoid it, eventually finds its way to you, and when it does, it doesn't come quietly, it comes completely. And that's exactly what was about to happen, because they thought everything was still under control, but in reality, things were slowly slipping out of their hands, and soon they wouldn't be able to ignore it anymore. Because they hadn't just rejected my help, they had let go of something much bigger, something they didn't fully understand. And when that realization finally reached them, it was going to change everything. They just didn't know it yet. But I did, and I was waiting. Have you ever watched something fall apart, not suddenly, not loudly, but slowly in ways that are almost invisible at first, until one day you realize nothing feels the same anymore. Because real breakdowns don't begin with chaos, they begin with small cracks, quiet mistakes, and a growing feeling that something isn't right, even if you can't explain why. That's exactly how it began. At first, nothing looked different. The house was the same, the routine was the same, everything seemed normal, but it didn't feel normal. There was a tension in the air now, a subtle heaviness that hadn't been there before, and the biggest change was in the way decisions were being made. Earlier, things moved with clarity. Now, everything felt slower, uncertain. They talked more, discussed more, but understood less. And that difference started to show. I noticed it in the smallest moments. My son and his wife would sit together, going over things that once would have taken minutes, but now stretched into long, complicated discussions. "What about this?" she asked one day, pointing at something on the paper. "I thought that was already handled," he replied. A pause, then another, and in that silence I saw it, uncertainty, not loud, not obvious, but real. They didn't say it, but they felt it. Because something wasn't as simple as they thought it would be. And for the first time, they didn't know why. I said nothing, because this wasn't the moment to explain. This was the moment for them to feel. Because feeling something is what creates understanding. Days passed, and those small moments began to grow. One issue turned into another, a delay here, a miscalculation there, a decision that didn't go as planned. Nothing too big, but enough to disturb the balance. And once balance is disturbed, everything starts to shift. The calm that once filled the house was gone. In its place was quiet pressure, more phone calls, more discussions, more effort. But still no clear solutions, because solutions don't come from effort alone, they come from understanding, and understanding comes from experience. Something they didn't have, something I had tried to offer, but they had refused. One morning, I heard my son speaking on the phone. His voice was different, sharper, more tense. "No, that's not possible. We checked everything," he said. But this time, there was no certainty behind his words. Only worry, only doubt. My daughter-in-law stood nearby, her expression tight, uneasy. "What happened?" she asked. "There's a problem," he replied, just that. But those few words carried weight, because this wasn't a small mistake anymore. This was something bigger. Something they couldn't ignore. They sat down again. The papers were in front of them. But this time, it wasn't just about numbers. It was about consequences. "Why didn't we catch this earlier?" she said, her voice tense. "I thought everything was fine," he replied. But now what he thought didn't matter, because reality was different. And reality doesn't adjust itself to fit what you believe. I watched them, quietly, because I had seen this before, many times. Just not from this side. There had always been moments like this in the past. Moments when something could have gone wrong, but I had stepped in early, corrected things, prevented the problem before it even existed. But now no one was doing that, and the result was right in front of them. Days turned heavier. Conversations became more urgent. The calm was completely gone now. In its place was pressure, confusion, and something else, fear. I noticed it in my son, the way he sat alone sometimes. Quiet, thinking, trying to connect things, trying to understand where it all went wrong, because deep down he had started to realize something. This wasn't just bad luck. This wasn't just a random mistake. Something was missing, something important, and that realization was slowly finding its way to him. One evening, I saw him sitting alone, staring at nothing, lost in thought. "This shouldn't be this complicated," he said softly to himself. That sentence, it stayed with me because it meant something had shifted. He had started comparing, started remembering that things weren't always like this. That earlier things felt easier, smoother, clearer, and now they didn't. That's where understanding begins, not with answers but with questions, the right questions. What changed? What's missing? Why is this happening? And once those questions begin, the truth isn't far behind. He hadn't said it yet, he hadn't admitted it, but he was getting closer, closer to realizing that the difference wasn't the situation. It was the absence, my absence. Not physically, but in the role I used to play, the one they believed they didn't need anymore. And now they were feeling that loss completely, but they still hadn't come to me, not yet. Because accepting that you need help isn't the hardest part. The hardest part is going back to the person you once refused. And they weren't ready for that yet, but they would be, because the problems weren't stopping. They were growing slowly, steadily, until they reached a point where ignoring them would no longer be possible. And when that moment arrived, there would only be one option left: to come back, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Because they thought they could handle everything without me, but now they were about to learn something much deeper. Some things in life don't just require effort, they require understanding. And when you lose that, you don't just lose control, you lose direction. And once that happens, there's only one thing left to do: go back to the place where you first learned how to stand. and that place was me. And very soon they were going to come back, not as decision makers, but as people who needed help. And when that happened, everything would change. Have you ever seen someone return, not with the same confidence they once had, not with the same certainty, but with quiet hesitation, carrying the weight of a choice they now understand? Because coming back isn't just about asking for help, it's about facing the moment you realize you were wrong, and that realization is never easy. That day, the house was unusually quiet. No discussions, no arguments. Just a stillness that felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. I was sitting in my room, near the window, the same place I had sat so many times before, but this time I felt different. Not hurt, not angry, just aware. Aware of everything that had happened, and everything that was about to happen. There was a soft knock on the door, gentle, hesitant. "Mom," my son's voice came from outside. The same voice, but this time it carried something new, not confidence. Not certainty, just vulnerability. "Come in," I said quietly. He entered. My daughter-in-law followed, both of them silent for the first time in a long time. They stood there for a moment as if unsure how to begin. As if the words they needed felt heavier than they expected, I looked at them calmly, not questioning, not reacting, just present. "Sit," I said softly. They sat down, but no one spoke. The silence between us was no longer uncomfortable. It was honest, because there was nothing left to hide behind. Finally, my son spoke. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was slow, careful, as if every word mattered. I nodded slightly. Because I already knew, not the exact words, but the meaning behind them. "We made a mistake," he said, simple, direct, but this time there was no explanation attached to it, no justification, just truth. My daughter-in-law lowered her eyes slightly. "We thought we could handle everything," she added softly. "Thought, past tense, that's how you know realization has begun." I didn't interrupt, because this wasn't my moment to speak. It was theirs to understand. "But things aren't working," my son continued, his voice quieter now. "We're trying, but we can't figure it out." And there it was, the truth fully spoken, not hidden, not softened, real. They needed help. I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment I didn't see the man sitting in front of me. I saw the child he used to be, the one who would come to me when he didn't understand something, the one who trusted me without question. And in that moment I felt no anger, only a quiet sadness and something deeper, understanding, because life doesn't just teach through success, it teaches through realization. "What do you want from me?" I asked calmly, not harsh. Not distant, just clear. He hesitated, just for a second, but that second said everything. "Mom, we need your help." Those words, they were simple, but they carried weight, because behind them was everything that had changed. Ego softened. Certainty broken, truth accepted. I closed my eyes for a moment, not to avoid them, but to gather myself, because this wasn't just their moment, it was mine too. I could have reminded them. I could have said, "You refused me when I offered." I could have made them feel the weight of their choice, but I didn't, because relationships aren't about winning, they're about understanding. "I will help you," I said quietly. Both of them looked at me, almost surprised, as if they didn't expect it to be that simple, but I wasn't finished. "But this time you need to understand something," I added, their attention sharpened, because now they were listening, not casually. Not out of habit, but with intention. "Helping doesn't mean I take control," I said gently. "It means I stand with you." I paused, let the words settle. "Not in front of you, not instead of you, but beside you." Silence. But this time it wasn't heavy, it was steady, because something had shifted completely. My son's eyes filled slightly. "We underestimated you," he said softly. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "You didn't underestimate me." I held his gaze. "You just stopped seeing me." And that was the truth, because when you stop seeing someone, you stop understanding their value. And when you stop understanding their value, you start believing you don't need them. But life has a way of correcting that belief, not immediately, not loudly, but surely. In the days that followed, nothing changed overnight. There was no dramatic transformation, no sudden perfection, just awareness, carefulness, a quiet shift in how things were done. My son began asking again, not out of dependency, but out of respect. My daughter-in-law listened more, spoke less. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. And me, I didn't step back into my old role completely. I didn't need to, because this wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward differently, with balance, with clarity. With mutual respect, I was still there, still part of their lives, but now my presence was understood, not assumed, and that made all the difference. Because in the end, this was never about help, it was about value. And the truth is, when you choose something over someone, you don't just gain what you chose, you lose what you didn't. And sometimes that loss is something you can't fully get back, but if you're lucky, you understand it in time. Before it's too late, because some choices don't come with a second chance, they come with a lesson. and you carry that lesson for the rest of your life.